BIKEWAY project meeting. Due to the COVID health crisis that we're all experiencing, Dottie, your Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, is looking at new ways to conduct our public outreach. So this is our first project meeting that is being conducted online and over the phone. So please bear with us as we adjust to this new system and this new normal that we're all experiencing. We will try to resolve any technical issues that may arise, like right on the spot. If you don't mind telling us if there's something that is happening on your side that you're seeing, please let us know. My name is Gaby Cerrado, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. Online, we also have our councilman's office representing. We have Anita Bañuelos from Councilman Clark's office, and we have Daisy Rocha Vasquez, Benjamin Chavez, and Melissa Mejia from Councilwoman Torres' office. So thank you everybody for joining us and making time on this Wednesday evening for all of us. Next slide, please. Buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Bienvenidos para la reunión pública del ciclo carril de la Avenida de Kentucky. Debido a la crisis de salud, el Departamento de Transportación e Infraestructura de la ciudad está buscando nuevas maneras, de nuevas formas de llevar a cabo nuestras reuniones públicas. Esta es la primera reunión del proyecto que se realiza por internet y por el teléfono. Por favor, tenga paciencia con nosotros. Mientras tanto, nosotros nos adaptamos a este nuevo sistema. Vamos a tratar de resolver cualquier asunto, cualquier problema de que tengamos o que venga a salir durante esta reunión al mismo tiempo. Esta reunión va a ser interpretada simultáneamente en español. Si usted prefiere o necesita esta presentación en español, por favor, en la parte de abajo de su pantalla tiene que haber el icono que dice traducción y solamente haga el clic en español. Ahí va a poder escuchar la reunión en español. Gracias. Oh, next slide, please. We hope that this meeting in total will last about an hour. The presentation from our team will last about 45 minutes. We will have 2 live polling segments where you'll be able to provide us answers to different questions that they're gonna come up. In addition, the team will be answering questions in 2 different times throughout the presentation. If you have questions or comments, please, on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A icon on the meeting bar. So please just click on it, type your question away. I will be monitoring the Q&A box, and I'll be able to ask the team questions when the time comes. This meeting is also being recorded so that folks that either if we're giving you information way too fast or you just want to revise it again, so we're taping this so we can make it more accessible for everybody. If you by any chance have project questions during the meeting that you don't feel comfortable other people seeing, or after the meeting, please email it, send us your questions or comments to bikes@denvergov.org. That's BIKES at Denver, DNVER, gov.org. Since we have so many bike projects happening at the same time, if you can, please add Kentucky on the subject line so that it gets routed faster to our team. Next slide, please. And with that, I present to you our all knowledgeable Kentucky Bikeway team. Geneva Hun is our senior project planner. She keeps all of us on track and makes sure that the facility reflects the values of the community and the city. We have Michael Koslow, is our city design engineer that is helping us design the best, most comfortable facility for the neighborhood. And lastly, we have John Hausman. He's our consultant engineer that is leading the work with his team to design this project so it can be implemented as quickly as possible. And with that, I will hand it over to Geneva, who can walk us through a little bit of the history and existing conditions of the corridor.
Great, thank you, Gabby. And again, my name is Geneva Houghton, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time this evening to join us on this virtual platform and roll with us as we're trying out something new. And we hope that it's still an effective way to reach the community. So the first is we're going to try a poll. And for this, you're going to see a polling option pop up on your screen. And we're going to ask you, what is your top connection to this corridor? And unfortunately, you can only choose one of these. So let us know, do you live along the corridor? Do you work along it? Do you access any shops or restaurants along Kentucky? Do you or is someone in your family in one of the schools like Castro or Kepner Beacon? Do you go to Westwood Park or do you go to Huston Lake Park? So let us know, and we'll show the results live in just a few seconds. And this is where we were joking that we needed the Jeopardy music, but that's maybe our next public meeting. Okay, so the poll should be up on your screen right now. So go ahead and click on your top connection to the corridor for us. All right. So we'll just give you a couple more seconds to give us your input, and then we'll show the results live. Okay, what's that look like? Okay, so some of it looks like for the most part, we have people who live on the corridor who are accessing shops or restaurants along Kentucky, and people who are using the park. So 11% are saying their top connection to the corridor is that they go to Westwood Park, and we have 21% saying that they go to Huston Lake Park. And then looks like over 35% of people who responded, none of these quite fit, and that's okay. Thank you for taking the poll. And I think it's interesting to see how all of us are connected to this corridor in some way. And that, like any good street, it serves a lot of different purposes. So thanks for that. We're gonna have one more poll a little bit later. Okay. So we're here tonight to look at this corridor, and this we're looking at it from Sheridan Boulevard, which is the border between Denver and Lakewood, all the way over to Zuni Street. And this particular corridor is pretty unique in Denver. First of all, it's continuous, and there are no jogs or other disruptions in it. And it crosses two of our great and crucial neighborhoods. So it's from Westwood to Athmar Park, and through this corridor, we have the parks and the trails, the Blvd connection. We have several elementary schools and middle schools, so lots of kids and teachers and families that are using this particular corridor. And just in general, it's one of those key east-west connections that gets people to some of our north-south routes like Irving and Federal, and definitely to Morrison Road as well, that get people to other parts of Denver. So we're here looking at the full corridor and have an opportunity to change how the street looks. And we're here because we're working as part of the overall city program that is trying to capitalize on the routine resurfacing that's done every year. So as streets are resurfaced and you go in and the street is repaved, it's also our opportunity to build out some of the plans that we've been working on. So about almost 10 years ago in 2011, a citywide bike plan identified Kentucky as a bikeway because of all those things that I just mentioned, that it's this really key east-west corridor, that it's connected to schools and neighborhoods. We have a number of families and housing there along the corridor where people are living and working and just being. And then again in 2015, this particular corridor was recommended again for a bikeway. And in 2019, as part of the Blueprint Denver update, which was a 3-year process with thousands of people's input, this particular corridor was identified as a bicycle priority street. So now we're in 2020 and we say, great, we have this amazing opportunity to put in a bikeway as we're also going to be resurfacing next year in 21. So we're here tonight to talk to you about the project, to let you know what's going on, get your input, and then as we move forward into design, to make sure that that all your input and desires for the corridor are heard. So as I was talking about with the Blueprint Denver plan, there were about 6 different key values that were identified for Denver. Things like a diverse and vibrant neighborhood, to have healthy and active communities, to have safe and connected and accessible places. And we have the opportunity through this project to really embody all of those values and to help make them a reality. And in addition, in 2017, the Mayor's Mobility Action Plan said, look, we have a lot of people coming into Denver, and we have an opportunity and really a responsibility to help people move better throughout the city. So as part of that, we need to make sure that we can get people around walking, biking, taking transit, and overall just moving better throughout the city, so we don't have as much congestion and air pollution and all those things that make it a worse place to live. And that same year, the Vision Zero Action Plan was released. And this is a statement saying our goal is to get to 0 traffic-related injuries and fatalities by 2030. And it's an ambitious goal, but it's one that's really important to all of us. And through this project, we have an opportunity to work towards that goal and make the street safer for everyone who's using it. And so building upon all of this, when we're talking about bikeways, we know that they are a reflection of citywide values. So not only are we looking at a way of providing people a safe and comfortable way to get around the city, to reach a 15% commute mode share, which means that 15% of all Denverites are going to be getting around by walking or biking when they go to work. It's a way to create safer streets for everyone, where we have a quarter of all households within a quarter mile of a high comfort bikeway, and that we are working towards this ambitious goal of building out 125 miles of bikeways by 2023. And maybe you've heard of that goal before. This particular project is part of that, and your input tonight is getting us closer to that. So next I'm gonna hand it over to my colleague, Michael.
Thanks, Geneva, and thanks for that background a little bit about some of the conditions and why we're doing what we're doing here in Kentucky. I wanted to kind of emphasize a few years ago, the Denver Regional Council of Governments has done submitted a mailing poll, and they talked about, or they asked citizens of Denver and the Denver region, you know, how do you feel about bicycling? Would you bike anywhere? Would you only bike if, you know, there were no cars on the road, etc.? And so what I want to kind of emphasize here, if you look at it, I'll take it from the most confident to the least confident at the back end. The most confident cyclists, you might have seen them on the path with some cycling jerseys on, but they are confident and don't mind riding, say on Peña Boulevard or on a really busy street. They're fine. Another percentage, and not quite, you know, a little bit more, but there is a percentage, about 12% of Denverites that say, sure, I'd ride my bike on it. And think of a bike lane like the Morrison Road bike lanes that are kind of busy and a little hectic and might throw off a lot of folks, but some people might say, well, I can go ahead and get there. But the vast majority of Denverites and the folks that we're trying to get to are this interested but concerned. They say, I drive to work now and I'd ride my bike, but there's this one busy crossing or the cars are going too fast, etc. And then there are folks that about 25% that feel like we no way, no how. Either I have a mobility impairment, I'm just not comfortable riding a bike, I don't have a bike, etc. So, but if you want to go to the next slide, I feel like probably the key to this is this 75% of Denverites that say, yeah, I'd ride my bike if I had that good facility, that comfortable facility. And so when you capture all of those folks, that tends to move that percentage of folks that are in Denver that are mode sharing, choosing to ride their bike to work, choosing to ride their bike to run errands, etc. around town. So I want to emphasize next that we have this interactive opportunity within the meeting. And I want you guys to once again kind of think about things, you know, as we're envisioning this project and we're getting ready to put it together. Could you, back up a little bit here. Okay, thank you. So is it, hey, if we had a bike lane from Sheridan all the way to Zuni, I'm good? Is it, hey, if those buzzing cars that are going by really fast could be a little slower, I'd be more comfortable? Is it, hey, at the crossing of Tennyson's, at the crossing of Irving is busy, I can't get across there along Kentucky? Or is it, you know, that you'd be the only person, and if there were more folks out there riding bikes, you'd feel a little more confident out there riding? Or would nothing make you feel more comfortable riding your bike on Kentucky? So I'm going to pause for a minute, and we'll go ahead and submit the poll. Thanks, Francisco.
And while we wait, just I want to encourage everybody to please send us your questions in the Q&A box. Our first Q&A session is coming up, and so we need as many questions as possible. Thanks.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, so I think we have maybe a few more seconds, and we could do the results here. We'll learn what improvement would make you feel more comfortable riding on Kentucky on your bike. And again, I just want to thank everyone for doing this in this weird format. It's definitely new to us as an agency too. So thanks for bearing with us during that. And I believe we've had a minute. Are there results? All right, so this is a very, very telling. Thank you folks for providing those responses. So looks like slowing cars is our #1 goal here as we're building this facility, as we're designing it and putting it together. So I guess I would only emphasize the continuous bikeway being also very important. You don't want to have a gap where you've got a bike lane and then you know, a block or two where it's not there. So thanks, folks. And I believe, does that take us to a question and answer period? Gabby.
Gabby, yeah, you're muted.
Technical difficulties, love it. This does not happen in live meetings. So we have our first Q&A sections. Thank you, Geneva, for pointing that out. We have some really good questions, so team, get ready. And a couple of comments as well. First of all, I want to address Amanda. You provided a comment regarding a potential development that is happening in the district at 3057 West Kentucky Avenue. Some issues with the parking there. That is a 311 request, and I'm actually also texting right now with our Councilman Torres's office. I will be providing her your comment. Stay tuned. We will be reaching out to you. If you don't mind providing us your contact information, that'll be amazing. Or only I can see what's happening on the Q&A. That little comment from Daryl. We love this idea. There is a lot of speeding and dangerous driving on Kentucky Avenue, such as drag racing and driving on the wrong side of the road. On the one-way section between Clay and Vallejo, especially along the entire south side of Huston Lake Park. Also, drivers do not stop at stop signs. For my fellow cyclists, will that be addressed for intersecting North and South streets and then at the Kentucky Zuni T intersection? So what are we, Geneva, what are we looking for when it comes to the safety improvements in the cross sections?
Thanks, Gabby. That's a good question. For this particular bikeway, we are not going to be changing any of the stop control for the north-south intersections that are coming to this particular corridor. that tends to be part of a broader and a far more intensive level of analysis that's needed in order for us to change how stop signs are patterned and which crossing gets them. That said, near Huston Lake Park, we know that because of the one-way facility there, that we need to actually shore up quite a lot of the space and take a closer look at the movements around the park. So we'll be spending a lot more time in designing that particular section of the bikeway. But generally, to answer your question, the stop control and the stop signs won't change.
Thank you, Geneva. We have a question from Daryl. Where there are marked bike lanes, drivers use the lanes as vehicle turn lanes. Will there be an upright post at the intersections to block drivers from turning from the bike lanes? Good examples of barriers are along Union Station and along Broadway. Geneva, would you mind answering this question?
Sure, thanks, Gabby. So the question is really asking about whether or not we're going to be adding a vertical separation to separate bikes from cars. And that question is one that we take a lot of different data into effect for. And one is looking at speeds and volumes. So the speeds of the cars that are going, the volume of cars on the street that we see. And then we also have to take into account our ability to maintain those kind of facilities. And for this particular corridor, while we do see speeds that are high, and we'll get into that later in the presentation, the volumes so far are low enough that we think that just providing a separation on the street itself by the way of a buffer will be sufficient. And part of that is an education for drivers and an education for street users about how to normalize that and how do we make sure that people who are driving and turning right don't just go into the bike lane. And I do think that that takes some time and really some organization of the street and normalizing for that to happen. Thanks for your question.
I'm sorry, I'm going to throw another one at you, Geneva. It's a lot of existing conditions and planning questions. A general comment from Johnny. Once the Kentucky section has been built, the key missing link is access to the South Platte River Trail. This would be easiest through Virginia. Has this been planned?
That's a good question, and off the top of my head, I don't have that answer. I know that we have, through the Denver Moves bike planning program and funding through the Elevate Go bond that was passed in 2018, there is funding for a number of projects in Athmar Park. And I can follow up with you after about that question if you provide your email address. Sorry, I don't have that one memorized.
No problem. How much longer do we have for Q&A? Do we have a couple more? Can we take two more?
I think you can answer a couple more.
Okay, excellent. Well, Amy just said about the poll question. I wish I could pick more than one. So mental note for the next round. Thank you, Amy, for that comment. We also have Rob. When we're talking about the speeds and how bike lanes facilitate people slowing down, would this mean 20 miles an hour or less? Geneva, or if you want to handle this one as well, or Michael.
I can take this one.
Go, Michael.
All right, so yeah, currently our citywide speed limit is 25 miles per hour. That is what Kentucky is currently signed at. There are other city council initiatives to make that number go down. There's one exception, and that's where we have elementary schools. Then that can reduce the speed limit to 20. Right now, there is national guidance that 20 is going to help a lot. If you think about as a vulnerable road user, like a bicyclist or a person walking, their odds of surviving a crash are much better at 20 than they are at 30, and they're way better at 30 than they are at 40. So that's really good feedback. The only constraint and for us in doing that is that we do have that citywide speed limit. So that does kind of compel us to keep it posted at 25. However, what we can do is continue to make what we would call traffic calming elements, like a neck down, which I'll describe as kind of like narrowing of the travelways, or introducing of speed cushions. But those are outside of a very simple signing and striping project such as this one. So they might be additional enhancements we can make, and we can talk about as we recognize those speeds still need to continue to go down.
Thank you, Michael. And we have an interesting one for Michael, if you don't mind. Would you consider adding speed bumps to slow traffic along Huston Lake Park? We've been told no because fire trucks drive on Kentucky. Fire trucks around the world navigate speed bumps in other residential neighborhoods.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And it is a complex question, to your point. We have a monthly ongoing between Dottie and the fire department right now, as we recognize the city has multiple goals, and the fire department has what's called an ISO 1 rating, which means that, and I'm not going to quote them, but there's a giant percentage, 80 or 90% of their runs need to be within 5 minutes. However, we've recognized opportunities for speed cushions like what exists right now in 12th Avenue and Cheesman Park are there. And what's going on right now is we want to make sure that we're coordinating what we're doing for these infrastructure improvements with the fire department. And to that end, I will say the standards that Dottie is proposing associated with the bicycle design manual in 2020 will include a speed cushion to slow down drivers. However, we need to be careful and coordinated with their fire department partners to make sure we don't proliferate them to the point that if there is that emergency, that they're delayed in getting to your house or my house.
Thank you. So there's got to be a lot of coordination that needs to occur. Actually, Amy is requesting to see the map again. If you don't mind, folks, going back out to the map. Thank you. We're going to leave it there while we answer one more. Let's answer one more question. Actually, Anita also had a question similar to nature, but I was actually able to look up the answer. Does this bikeway in Athmar connect to an existing bike facility? And right now I was able to look on our bicycle master plan, and we do have a bike facility planned on Tejon, which obviously goes north to south. And that one would obviously connect to the Virginia connection that Geneva mentioned just like a little bit before. Tejon is a neighborhood bikeway. And so they're still trying to figure out those elements of what would it be, how can we make it comfortable for our road users. But that would be sort of our north and south connection that will be able to connect us to Platte River Trail. So thank you, Anita, for that question. And let's do one more, shall we? Let's see. We have from Johnny, more than a buffered bike lane, most people in our neighborhoods are concerned about speeding, as the poll showed. Due to our large, wide roads and tiny sidewalks, what is the city doing to reduce speed across the neighborhoods? So both of them. Michael, would you mind answering this one?
Sure. Yeah. So turning about speeding in general, I'm sorry. There's too much information going on at the same time.
No worries. Let me repeat that question for you again.
Thank you.
Okay. So more than a buffered bike lane, most people in our neighborhoods are concerned about speeding, as the poll showed. Due to our large, wide roads and tiny sidewalks, what is the city doing to reduce speeds across the neighborhoods?
Thank you. And that also is very good. I kind of alluded a little bit to one of the challenges we have with posting speed limits. However, at the same time, what Geneva had mentioned earlier is Denver has adopted Vision Zero, which is a way of saying that no traffic crash is acceptable in the public right-of-way. And part of that Vision Zero involves the lowering of speed limits. Currently, that I'm aware of, there are 4 corridors in the city where the speed limit was reduced last fall. There's also an ongoing citywide speed limit study going on that I would be glad to connect folks with if we need to do that. I'm glad to do that. However, what we're trying to do is look at it from a a holistic perspective and not just one corridor. So we do run into certainly speeding challenges, and you know, we can't fix if someone wants to go the wrong way of the road in the middle of the night, but what we can do is make it look discouraging by making narrowing features and like, for example, the curb line to curb line in Kentucky, let's say, I know it varies, but let's say it's 36 feet. Well, when you make a travel lane narrower, that makes that visual look, you know, hey, I can't just cruise all the way with this 36 feet. I'm stuck in this 10-foot wide travel lane. And I would say further, there's definitely the enhancements, like I kind of mentioned before, that there are opportunities to do speed cushions, there are opportunities to do neck downs, but we have to be careful. A neck down would be narrowing entire width of the road. We have to be careful because we also want to have a continuous bicycle facility. So that's the challenge for that.
Thank you, Michael. We're gonna have one more round of Q&A. So again, please submit your questions. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a little Q&A icon. Just type away. I'm responding to you guys as well. For those who have just sort of general, small little questions and comments, and I'll be reading them out loud. But let's shoot it back to Geneva, who's gonna give us a little more of the existing conditions on the corridor.
Okay, thanks, Gabby. And I love seeing all these questions coming in. So as you all know, this is a really crucial corridor in Denver, and it connects schools, it connects Boys and Girls Club, parks, and commercial areas all together. Even though it's primarily residential, we still know that there are community centers and places that people are going every day, and that provide this particular corridor its special character. And with that, we also know that there are challenging crossings. So Morrison Road and Federal Boulevard are two of the highest volume crossings. Sheridan is also, but those two are fully within the city limits, and so we have a little bit more leverage on what we can do with them. And we know that crossing those are challenging for people walking and for people biking. And so this particular project, we have an opportunity to establish better clarity at the intersection. So when people are traveling along Kentucky by bike, they feel more comfortable crossing those particular intersections. There's also existing transit. We have RTD routes 4 and 11 along the corridor. And this project will only enhance the transit functions by providing people an opportunity to walk and bike more comfortably to transit itself. And I did see a question in the question panel about parking. And the existing parking along the corridor, for the most part, it's just free parking and very few restrictions on parking itself. The table on the right is showing that over 80% of all parking that is there is available. We counted that at 3 different times of the day. And the point of counting it then is to understand how a street is used throughout one particular day. And speed was the #1 concern that folks had in the poll. And the connection between parking and speed is that on streets that aren't very well parked, like Kentucky, with over 80% of all parking stalls available, it means that someone driving a car, it just feels easier to go faster because the sight that you have as a driver is wider. So it's nothing that people are intentionally doing. It's just easier to drive faster if the street is wider. And so when we have a street like this, by putting down a bike lane, it would narrow that visual corridor and slow cars some. And we want to note that the parking impact would be full parking removal on both sides to fit in the bikeway. But as we're explaining, that this has the opportunity to increase safety by decreasing the speeds that we may see along the corridor. And there's one part of the parking that we would not be removing, and that's on the north side of Kentucky between Morrison and Raleigh, adjacent to the mobile home community, because we know that those residents are parking there along Kentucky. And let's talk about speed. So the posted limit is 25 for the entire corridor. However, we know that cars are going much faster than that. So the prevailing speed, or kind of the most common speed that we're seeing, is 35 to 33 miles per hour. And we know that 5% of all trips are actually above 40 miles per hour. And in just a little bit, I'll talk about why that speed matters so much. And then those red numbers are showing us the maximum speeds that we clocked. So the speed data was collected over 3 days, and we saw extremely high speeds, particularly late at night. And these speeds are showing us that people are using Kentucky to drag race and to race their friends and to really partake in unsafe behaviors. And those speeds are ones that we're not going to be able to plan out, and that's a human behavior, and we'll need other ways of enforcing that. But it does indicate to us that this is an enormous safety risk for people walking, biking, driving, to anyone who's using the corridor. And it's something that we're taking into account as we're planning for a bikeway. How can we make this a safer place for people to ride, where all ages and abilities of people biking feel comfortable, where kids can bike to school without fearing being hit by a car. And the black line there is showing us volumes. So we're seeing more cars between Sheridan and Irving, and a very significant drop off of cars between Irving and Zuni. So that means that cars are either turning from Irving onto Kentucky or vice versa. So they're gonna, for instance, go east and then take a right or left on Irving, and we're seeing a lot less traffic at the eastern edge. And why all of this matters so much is because we know that safer streets will save lives. In Denver last year, 70 people died just by getting around. That's people walking and biking and taking transit and driving. And the graphic on the right is showing us that speed is not only significant because it is the #1 predictor of a crash happening, but it also is the #1 predictor of the severity of that crash. So if you were hit by a car going 20 miles per hour, you have a much better chance of surviving that crash. Whereas a crash going 40 miles per hour, you are more likely to die. And it's grim, and it's why we care so much about speeds. And as we're planning and designing for this particular corridor, it's our goal to build a street and to redesign the street so that we can meet Denver's Vision Zero goal. So we have 0 fatalities by 2030. And what that looks like along this corridor in particular is that we have a couple of, we have areas of hotspots for serious injuries. And this is the data between 2013 and today. And we're seeing that at Sheridan, at Morrison, a few along Kentucky, and then a huge preponderance of that at Federal. And then we have a fatality hotspot at Kentucky and Federal. And I don't think these will surprise anyone based on your use of the corridor and where you live and how you experience it. But this data is really telling us that we need to be planning and paying a lot of attention about how people can cross at Federal and Morrison and feel safe. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Thanks, Geneva. So, as we started to talk about, like, when we're done, when we have these bike lanes installed, what are some of the benefits that we're hoping we're going to get from this facility compared with how Kentucky is today? And we've already kind of alluded to that reducing speeding seems to be like a key component to what we're going to be accomplishing here. And this corridor, particularly more than other corridors in Denver with bike lanes, has these challenges. So we are going to be emphasizing how we can do traffic calming on the corridor as we introduce the design. Lower stress crossing. So right now, if someone were riding their bike on Kentucky and they're approaching those busy intersections like at Morrison, Irving, and especially at Federal, we will get you that space on the road that you seek, that makes it so that you're not challenging and having to dodge cars. safe routes to school. As Geneva had noted, there are multiple schools along the corridor, and I know that there are other challenges, but hey, could you imagine what kind of world it would be where you could have your kids being able to ride their bike to school rather than having that long line of picking up and dropping off and all that kind of thing. And if our project is successful, we'll have provided that for you. Connect's proposed bikeways, Geneva also had alluded to, there's some other bikeways coming to Southwest Denver, like on South Raleigh, Lowell, and Irving. So when these facilities, and in city terms, this means years, but to know that as we're programming and planning our network, to know that we're planning for those future connections. And just put in a tiny plug for the Westwood Via Verde. Some of you that aren't familiar with it, Geneva, could you spin back to that map again for Kentucky? So the Westwood Via Verde is a fantastic walking and biking loop that's been envisioned from the ground up by residents of Westwood. And with the idea being, hey, I can get around my neighborhood, I can get to school on foot and on bike. And if you look in between Westwood Park and where there's a Tennessee Greenway, kind of a diagonal section of park there, that portion of Kentucky is coincident with the Westwood Via Verde. And once we get a bike lane put in, and we have other enhancements like wayfinding and murals, things to kind of brand it as the Westwood Via Verde, there's that will be a chunk of this loop within the neighborhood. Thank you, Geneva. And I guess we'll have to spin back to the, probably we could go to the next slide beyond the project benefits. So I kind of want to emphasize, yeah, we know we have our work ahead of us. Last year, there were 70 fatalities on the streets of people walking, biking, taking transit, driving on the streets in Denver. And our goal with Vision Zero is that should be zero. Not one of those fatalities should be acceptable. And so it's an ambitious effort, and it takes a lot of work on a lot of different corridors. But Kentucky is one of them, and one of the goals is that we can make it a more improved, safer corridor. So with that, I believe we are back to Gabby and another question and answer.
You see, I put myself on mute again. So yes, we have a lot of good questions. So panelists, get ready. The first one, well, comments in general, and there's a general question. Amanda is asking, it has a lot of sort of general issues about the parking, on-street parking. She would like to point out, sorry, I'm trying to find a couple of her comments. Sorry, they're sorry, that first of all, she's stating that there is a 100% utilization rate on Kentucky from Federal to past Hazel. So definitely, if we can take that definitely into consideration, that not everyone can afford to walk blocks or miles to get home, and that here that not a lot of people can afford parking, and to consider those residents that do need to park their cars on the roadway itself. So Geneva, do you want to answer, sort of provide a comment on that?
Sure. And those are all valid points. We did collect data, and we have the data for Kentucky between Irving and Federal, and can certainly take a look at that. We know that the percentage isn't quite that high. The one thing that's good is that we'll have the parking on the side streets is still open. So while there may be some inconveniences for people who may need to park on a side street, that parking is available, and it's not as occupied as, say, a Capitol Hill or other parts of Denver where we know people are parking just car to car to car. And overall, every time that we're going into a street and making these kinds of modifications, we know that there's an impact to people. But we also have to know that the greater impact and the greater benefit is that we're going to create a safer street. And so it may mean the daily inconveniences, but overall our goal is to have people who can move freely and not be killed. And it sounds grave, but again, it's the kind of things that we're trying to look at and take into consideration as we plan for this street. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Geneva. Amy, Michael, this one would be for you. This bike project goes past Castro Elementary. What are we doing to make it safer for families to bike to and from here?
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, so as Gabby's alluded to, we are going right in front of Castro Elementary School, which is in the Westwood neighborhood with the bike lane corridor in Kentucky. Right now, it has been established. There are a lot of kids that are into and out of school crossing the corridor. One of the things we do when we're looking at adjacent opportunities like this safe route opportunity is to put in what would be considered to be a median refuge. And for right now, those median refuges were limited in the scope of this project to only paint flex posts and only when we need them, and signage. So those median refuge islands will be comprised of those materials initially. If those are successful, and we also have other programmatic funding from other opportunities in the future, they can then become more permanent and made more concrete, so that someone trying to walk wouldn't have to navigate a crossing, cars crossing westbound and eastbound one at a time.
So I guess these improvements, Michael, will be going on the Westwood side of Kentucky then?
Correct, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank
in
you.
Front of
a little bit of regarding the intersection of Federal and Kentucky. Kayla asks, what will the Federal crossing bill look like? This is one of the scariest parts of walking and biking on the corridor. Michael, if you don't mind helping us out with that one.
Sure. Yeah, so at this stage in the design, we don't have it, exactly ironed out. However, I can speak to, for example, 23rd Avenue has bike lanes going across Federal. One of the keys to that is what I kind of alluded to before. We want to have that facility contiguous, not a bike lane and then 200 feet before the intersection, the bike lane ends, leaving the bicyclist kind of. So as we are designing that approach in what we know are not exactly the most favorable conditions for a bicyclist, I think that's the spirit of what we're going to keep in mind. It's likely, as we're doing, as we just installed last year on 31st Avenue in Park Hill, that we would also consider what we call a speed cushion. And those things are basically, we don't have them introduced in many parts of Denver yet, but the idea being, hey, if you are a pedestrian trying to walk across Federal, you can go ahead and shorten it. And if you are a car, you should drive a little more carefully and slowly while you're making those turns. And if you're a fire truck, you can just drive over those if there's a fire coming, but be careful and not hit anybody. So I'd say those are some of the features that are likely to be in that intersection design.
Thank you, Michael. All right, let's see. Jonathan is asking, I know that this is a paving paint project, but I see it on the Denver bike project map that this should connect to a future neighborhood bikeway on Lowell to get to Garfield Lake Park. Could we also add a couple of signs for wayfinding to the park so that people know where the best to turn? Also, he would like to be able to select more options in our polling. So Geneva, would you mind walking us a little bit through potential wayfinding options that we're implementing?
Yes, I can. And I'll also say, I agree with you on the polling. It is absolutely a limitation of this particular platform that we're using. I tried, but we're limited to just one. So a couple of things. Yes, we're going to be looking at wayfinding and trying to incorporate that as much as we can, particularly in navigating people through Huston Lake Park when they're going opposite the direction of the one-way street. And as this connects to other bikeways, so Kentucky intersects with Knox Court, which is one of the city's first neighborhood bikeways, which is a low stress, low volume street that prioritizes people biking. And Lowell is also one that is planned for a neighborhood bikeway. And the great news is that Lowell is part of that suite of packaged projects that was funded through the voters voting for that in 2018 as part of the GO bond. And so we're going to take that, and that's going to go through final design this year to be constructed next year, that particular neighborhood bikeway. So we'll be back to the community talking about those projects later this year. And of course, trying to incorporate wayfinding as much as we can so that people can actually go from one corridor to the next. So thanks for your question.
Thank you. So Casey also had a question about the wayfinding. We just answered that. Let's see. So Johnny has a comment. Maximum speeds are 80 to 99 miles per hour. Surely this would result in more speed cushions through the corridor. While it may delay fire trucks by a few seconds, these speeds will instantly kill anybody. I like to advocate for more of these speed cushions as they're considered throughout the whole corridor. So that's a comment for the team. Thank you, Johnny, sorry. Kayla is asking Geneva, hopefully maybe you'll be able to answer this help us answer this. Can automated enforcement be used to help with speeding issues since this is a school corridor?
Yes, so that is definitely one of the things that we can do as part of the Vision Zero action plan and the city's Vision Zero program is look at automated enforcement. In terms of the scope of this particular project, I think it's something that we can put on the table and look at, but it's not, as of today, it's not part of our Bikeway project.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm looking through these. Heidi has a comment. This is not some inconvenience when you're carrying your groceries or your baby to your home. The street will not be safe for those who have to cross the streets holding packages. This is very unfair and does not meet the needs of the families who live on Kentucky. I'm not 100% sure sort of what the reference of if you know, Geneva, would you mind speaking a little bit about how bike lanes help or provide a little more comfortable facility for pedestrians?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, Gabby. I'm going to go back to this slide, this one, and this was from a peer-reviewed research saying that as more people are walking and biking, we know that streets are getting safer. And this is part of, maybe you've heard the term safety in numbers, and that applies to transportation as well. And so when we see streets and particularly cities that have higher biking rates, we also know that there is a lower rate of fatalities and serious crashes that result in serious injuries for everyone who's using the street. So when we're talking about adding a bikeway to Kentucky and how it would impact parking by removing parking along Kentucky, we know that that has a day-to-day impact. However, we also know based on the data that that actually will make it safer as a pedestrian because it's overall going to change the feeling of the street so that cars are going to go slower. And as we've talked about with those really high rates of the 80 to 99 and the drag racing, we're not going to be able to change that through this project. But we are going to be able to change overall how people are using the street so that you will feel more comfortable crossing at an intersection. Or let's say you live mid-block and you need to cross the street and you look both ways, you're going to feel safer crossing. So that's how that all fits in together with the parking removal and adding a bikeway. It's a good question and a really valid comment.
So we have one more, an additional sort of parking comment that is this car to car. They can't, we can't just look at parking when everybody's at work. We have to look at parking when everyone, we have to look at parking when everybody has gone to bed. Geneva, would you mind going over the parking counts and when were they conducted?
Yes, I can. Can you repeat part of that question for me?
Yeah. That we can't, it was a general comment, that the team cannot just look at parking when everybody's at work, therefore when the streets are sort of half empty, that we have to look at parking when everybody has gone to bed, basically at the peak demand of parking.
Yes, definitely. And that's why on this slide, you'll see that the best practice is to collect times at 3 different. So that very early morning count most people are not at work at 5 a.m. So that's when we would consider it to be kind of the pure residential rates of parking. And then the late morning might catch the midday trips if we have people who are parking who work at the schools. And then evening will catch another way of people using the street. So all three of those are why we count them. And we'll also note that we counted these in January. So this is before COVID hit and any changes to how people are getting around. So this is like a more normal function of the street.
Thank you, Geneva. Johnny has a comment and question. I think I can answer that one. While this effort has been focused on Kentucky, there are so many more streets in both neighborhoods with exact same speeding issues. I like to suggest the city undertake a holistic approach to reducing speeds and rat runs throughout. I've never heard of that term, rat runs, so, you know, this is thank you, Johnny, for your comment and questions that you have provided throughout this. So this is obviously, as Geneva has mentioned, and as the team has mentioned, this is specifically sort of like a bike project, but we are looking at this at a more holistic level. Obviously, we have about 5 different projects that are happening on Kentucky where we're working with each other, the Safe Routes to School program, we have the BIKEWAYS efforts, at Irvington, Kentucky, we have the Pocket Park on the other side. So we're working with all these different communities and organizations and departments to make sure that we are looking at this. That's not just Kentucky itself. However, we also have our department, the DOTI, has also the Neighborhood Transportation Management Program, which is basically going neighborhood by neighborhood and addressing those elements at that local issue. So for the traffic calming elements on our local roadways that are not being addressed through the other buckets of efforts. So right now we are about to kick off the one a little bit on the north side at West Colfax and Villa Park neighborhood. We're just wrapping up the one on Baker and then Lincoln La Alma, but we'll be hitting all of our communities on the west side pretty shortly. So we're not just looking at projects, you know, just on an individual basis. We're making sure that we're looking at them from a bigger picture and what are the needs and try to address those needs through the different funding buckets that we have internally. But thank you for your question. And I think this is all the time that we have. We still have a lot of other questions in the queue. Geneva, would you mind telling us how would we answer those unanswered questions?
Yes, definitely. So we're going to take the unanswered questions and comments that have come through, and we'll do our best to offer a summary. We do have our email address here for if you would like to, if your question wasn't answered and you are interested in making sure that it does. I did see a question from Councilwoman Torres about the ADA accessibility spots. And we know that there's existing one ADA spot, and we are modifying as we move forward with design. We'll make sure that everything can fit, and we won't be removing that particular parking spot. And in the future, the conversations for applications will deal with how they can be on side streets. So I hope that answers your question, and we can follow up offline about that. Okay, so just for the sake of time, we are here in mid-April. Oh, nope, sorry. There we are. For tonight's open house, we're going to be moving into concept design this summer, and we'll come back to you in late summer, mid-fall with a concept design for you to react to. And because of COVID, we don't know the format of that meeting yet. It may be another virtual meeting like this. It might be an in-person meeting. Please stay tuned. As you registered for tonight's webinar, we'll take your email address and add that to our project mailing list so you can stay apprised of all project happenings. And moving later into this year, we're going to prepare a final design, and then we'll move into construction next spring, pending any changes that might happen with our street repaving team. And I also want to just note that as we're moving forward with this project, there are at least 5 other projects that are going on along this corridor. We know that there's a pocket park at Kentucky and Irving. We have the Safe Routes to School projects that Kozlo mentioned, in helping us get to Castro and Kepner more easily. There will be a signal upgrade at Kentucky and Morrison. We have some great intersection murals that are happening with the community, and then the Westwood Via Verde wayfinding projects. So if you are interested in finding out more of that information, that link is at the bottom of your screen. And in addition, if you want to stay apprised on this particular project, you can visit denvergov.org/bike program. You can also email bikes@denvergov.org, and someone from the project team will get back to you. Following April 27th, we will have a recording of this webinar, in addition with the Spanish translation that's been happening online at that bike program website. And overall, I genuinely want to thank everyone for taking the time this evening, and for our council representatives for showing up. We couldn't do this without you. I know that there were great questions and comments that came forward, and we'll do our best to get back to you about those. Thank you again, and be safe, stay warm. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.